Hi, my name's Adam. Welcome to the channel. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about RRSPs, and more specifically, should you contribute to an RRSP as you get closer to retirement? And this is a question we get from people all the time. Now, I'm 50, 55, 60, I'm 5 to 10 years from retirement. I feel like I have a big pension plan, so I don't need a big RRSP, or maybe you have a big RRSP and you don't feel like contributing more will actually help your retirement. So by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear idea on your situation and if you should still contribute to an RRSP. So let's look at Mr. and Mrs. YouTube, who we've used a few times on this channel in examples. So this client, I've aged them back a little bit for the illustration purposes. So now they're 60 years old, planning to retire at 65. He makes $150,000 a year. She makes $50,000 a year. They both have $300,000 saved into an RRSP plan, and they both have $100,000 in a TFSA plan. We've also added in a defined benefit or a pension plan into this as well. If we look at this, you can see here when they retire at 65, they have $145,000. We've laddered this income. So it's $145,000 from 65 to 75. Then it drops down to 125 and then to 108,875 from 86 to 90. We've knocked these clients off at 90. But what we want to look at is marginal versus average tax rates. And so I'll jump into Mr. YouTube and look at the tax rates here. Now, marginal tax rate is how much tax you pay on the next dollar that you make. Okay, so the next dollar that you make for Mr. YouTube, he's paying 44.37% in taxes. And then once he hits retirement, you can see here, his marginal tax rate goes down to 37.2, and his average or effective tax rate goes to 25.09. Now, heading into retirement, when he's working those next 5 years, he's making $150,000 and he's paying 44% in tax. So every dollar that he puts into an RRSP, he's getting back 44 cents. That's the tax break. So leading up to retirement, the money that you put into an RRSP, look at your marginal tax rate. If you make $150,000 like Mr. YouTube and you put $10,000 into an RRSP, you're going to get back $4,400 of taxes. Now let's flip it. Let's look at Mr. YouTube in retirement. Again, in retirement, he's sitting at 25.09%. So that means as he starts to pull money out of his RRSP, he's paying 25%. When we look at retirement, we want to look at, when we're drawing out income, that effective or average tax rate. So when he put it in, it was a marginal tax rate. That's the savings he got, was 44%. Now when he pulls it out, the average amount of tax he pays on every dollar is 25%. That's a big spread. A lot of us focus too much on marginal tax rate in retirement. I want you to shift to an average tax rate. And the lower and the more leveled out we can get that average tax rate in retirement, the more money you're going to have in your pocket, the less money you pay the government. So yes, Mr. YouTube should still keep putting money into an RRSP because he's getting 44 cents back now. That is in his pocket. He can recontribute that to an RRSP or TFSA or whatever he wants to do with it. That money will grow over the next 5 years, tax deferred inside an RRSP. And when he starts turning on the tap to pull money out of his RRSP, he's going to average out at the 25% rate. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at is, if I make too little income or too much income, does it still make sense to put money into an RRSP? Again, a lot of you will wind down work as you get closer to retirement and you're not sure, I used to make 80, now I'm making 50. Does it still make sense to put money into an RRSP? So this time I'm looking at Mrs. YouTube. Now, Mr. and Mrs. YouTube live in PEI. And I'll show you, PEI, I'm going to show you Ontario too, because I know a lot of you viewers are in Ontario, but essentially wherever you live, you just need to pull up a tax rate chart from that province. So you can see here, Mrs. YouTube is paying 28.8% marginal tax rate. Her effective tax rate when she hits retirement is 25%. Very close gap there. So in this case, for Mrs. YouTube working in PEI, I would say an RRSP probably doesn't make sense. There's a 3% tax difference. Keep piling away in your TFSA. We can look at other options for you, but an RRSP probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So typically speaking, this is general terms here, as long as there's a big enough spread. Now, big enough, I typically say 10%. If there's a 10% spread, then it's worth it. If it's less, you want to start considering maybe using a TFSA or other investment vehicle. Again, if you've maxed out your TFSA, you have the RRSP room and the spread is maybe 8, 9, 10%, consider using an RRSP because it still allows your money to grow tax deferred. Your other option is to put that money into a non-registered account and pay tax on it every year. So not the best option. If you want to figure out what income level you should be at, as far as, keep using RRSP, don't use an RRSP, just pull up a tax rate for your province or territory. Right now we're looking at PEI. So again, she was making 50,000. If she started making 60,000, her marginal tax rate would jump to 34%. So then she would probably it'd be smart to start drawing down that income or putting money into an RSP until she hit that 50,197 mark. If we look at Ontario here, you'll see the same thing. And I would say BC is very similar to where I live. That 50,000 mark. If you make above 50,000, RSPs probably make sense for you. If you make below 50, they probably don't. And again, the reason is if you make between $50,000 and $80,000 in Ontario, you're paying 29, almost 30% tax. In retirement, your income's probably going to be lower, and you can probably fall in that 20 to 24% tax rate mark. So you're getting that 10% spread or close to 10% spread. So general terms, if you're over 50,000, you can write your income down to about 50 for it to make sense. The last area I want to cover here is my RRSP is too big, and we've seen massive RRSPs, especially the last few years where people have made a lot of money DIY investing on stocks like Tesla and Shopify. I think we're going to see more of it going forward if crypto takes off, if Bitcoin, Ethereum, these take off. People are holding these ETFs in their RRSP. I think that has potential to create massive RRSPs as well. Now, again, I don't know if crypto and Bitcoin could go to zero, but there's these things that could create massive RRSPs, and we've seen it firsthand. So the question is, Adam, my RRSP is worth $1 million, $2, $3 million. Does it make sense to keep piling away in my RRSP? So what we've done here, instead of a $300,000 RRSP, I've inflated it to $1.3 million RRSP. Mrs. YouTube has a $300,000 RRSP. He has a $1.3 million RRSP, and they each have $100,000 in TFSA. So let's jump into it and look at the scenario here. So when we put on all this information, you can see they're working for 5 more years. When we look at their income, it's a great income. We've laddered it down. They're making $185,000 after tax and adjusted for inflation. If we go into Mr. YouTube, again, he has this $1.3 million RRSP. Now, again, let's look at tax rates. I'll always go back to average and marginal tax rates. He's got the same marginal tax rates, making the same money. His RRSP he has doesn't affect his marginal tax rate. Now, if we fast forward to retirement, you can see here, it was 24% before. We're now up to 30%, and it stays pretty level through retirement here, okay? Because we've done an RRSP meltdown, leveled out that tax bracket. So the break between marginal and average in retirement is still 14%. So here's a client with $1.3 million in an RRSP, making $150,000 a year. Yes, it makes sense. Marginal tax rate's 44. Average tax rate when he starts to pull money out of his RRSP in retirement is 30%. Now, if we make his income down to 100 and his RRSP up to 2 million, 2.5 million, there's going to be less of a spread on that marginal versus effective. And that's why as your accounts grow, as you get closer to retirement, it's important to have a plan in place. Whether you do it, have a professional do it, it doesn't matter, but make sure you understand the marginal tax rates leading up to retirement and what your average tax rate, a true average tax rate, is going to be in retirement. Now, obviously a lot comes into this: income splitting, other assets you have, pension. But again, that's why a plan takes all those into consideration, right? A lot of us think, oh, I have a $2 million RRSP, I shouldn't put more in. Well, what else do you have? Do you have TFSAs? Do you have a pension plan? How does this all kind of come together? Are you married or common law where you can income split? Again, for this client, there's a big income splitting. Okay, I'll just jump back into this here, and you can see there's this income splitting, pension income splitting right here. So when he hits retirement, his effective tax rate went from 24% to 30%, which isn't a big jump. I increased his RSP by $1 million. The reason why? He's shifting over $40,000 to Mrs. YouTube for tax purposes. Okay, so all of these things come in, and that's why a comprehensive plan needs to be put in place. Ideally, 5 up to 10 years before retirement. If you're within 5 years of retirement or early in retirement and you don't have a plan, obviously still get that plan in place. It's still massively worth it. But that's kind of the sweet spot, 5 to 10 years. And you can see why. All your assets, they have to come together as one in retirement. There's all these things that can come into play that make a massive difference on your income and tax situation in retirement. Hopefully the 3 areas I talked about today gives you better direction and create clear strategy around your RSP plan leading up to and into retirement. So thanks so much for joining us in this video. I really do hope it helped out, and we'll see you in the next one.